I ask a simple question that I kind of opened up with in our time together this morning at the beginning of the service. Are you tired? I don't mean did you have a bad sleep at night, but like bad night of sleep. Are you emotionally tired? Are you tired of the guilt and shame of your own sin? You said, like, I'm not going to do this again. I'm not going to look at that again on my computer. I'm not going to lose my temper again. I'm not going to waste away my day in slothfulness again. I'm not going to get drunk again. And yet you're right back at it in no time. You tired of that? Are you tired of what feels like hope suffocating effects that come from the sinful hard-heartedness of other people? Like hope just gets dried up in you as you are around those who are just sinfully hard-hearted. It just kind of takes the air out of the room. You tired of the angry blow-ups from others, the cold neglect, the smooth manipulation, the empty promises? Are you tired? Are you tired of hearing that yet another Christian pastor has fallen into sin and ended his ministry in disgrace and disqualification? It happened this week. What I'm asking is essentially, are you tired of living in a Genesis 3 world? You know what I mean by that? I'm talking about living life now in light of sin's curse. Last week we worked through Genesis 3, which describes how the world got to where it is, right? All messed up because of Adam and Eve. They chose to rebel against God. And now in Genesis 4, what happens is the continuing effects of life in a sin-cursed world just unfold before our eyes. That's what's taking place in Genesis 4. I don't know if, well, you didn't notice because we only read a portion of Genesis 4. We're going to work through the whole chapter this morning. But in Genesis 4, there's this back and forth interchange between multiplication, like people are having babies, and murder. Multiplication and murder. Verses 1 to 16, Adam and Eve multiply. They have two sons, Cain and Abel. And what does it result in? Murder. Demonstrating that sin has infiltrated the family. And then in verses 17 to 24, Cain, Adam and Eve's son, multiplies. And then one of his grandsons becomes a vicious murderer. And through him and his line, sin starts to infiltrate society. And we knew this was going to happen. Adam and Eve were commanded in chapter 1 to be fruitful and multiply before there was sin, which meant that God's perfect image, as man is created in the image of God, his perfect rule and representation was to spread across the whole earth as man multiplied. That was the purpose of it. But after they sin, what multiplies? Sin. God's distorted image multiplies. And this text in Genesis chapter 4 leaves us, the readers, thinking, and this is kind of depressing. Just more people means more sinning. Any hope for this sin-cursed world? And the chapter ends with just a glimmer, just a little glimmer of hope. That's how it is sometimes. Like you look at all around you, look at your own life, you look at what's all around you, just seems like all you see is sin and suffering and pain, and you wonder, any light in all this darkness? Any hope? Even a glimmer? And in verses 25 and 26, Adam and Eve multiply again, and something different happens. This new line, it says, this new line of people, it says of them, that they begin to call upon the name of the Lord. So there's a glimmer of hope. And that's our structure for this passage. It begins with scene 1, which can be titled Sin Infiltrates the Family. Sin infiltrates the family. Look at verse 1. Chapter 4, verse 1 says, "Now Adam knew his wife, Eve his wife, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, I've gotten a man with the help of the Lord." Now you're going to find throughout Genesis, names mean something. The word Cain means to acquire or to get. And I wonder if there's a little irony going on here. Certainly Eve named her son Cain because she acquired a son. But I wonder if this name also foreshadows some of Cain's sinful proclivity. He wants to get something, and when he doesn't get it, he responds very sinfully. Cain is a jealous, envious person. It's interesting that Eve says, I have gotten a man with the help of the Lord. She doesn't say, I've gotten a baby, or even I've gotten a son. She says, I've gotten a man, seemingly indicating some kind of hope here. At least she thinks there's hope here, because the word man is Adam. It's the same word in the Hebrew. So I've gotten another Adam, if you will. And probably what she's thinking is, maybe he's going to be the one that was promised back in chapter 3 who's going to crush the head of the serpent and make this world right again. Someone from my offspring. Let me remind you of what chapter 3, verse 15 says. Look there. Chapter 3, verse 15. I want to read this because this verse becomes key in the unfolding of the rest of the book of Genesis. Chapter 3, verse 15. I will put enmity. This is God speaking to Satan, who is in the form of a serpent. I will put enmity between you, Satan, and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. So what he's saying is there's going to be this ongoing war between the children of the devil and the children of Eve. The children of Eve represent the children of God. We read it in 1 John, didn't we? And the children of devil represent those who reject God and are following the ways of the devil, even if they don't even know it. This ongoing war, how is it going to come to an end? Look at the end of verse 15. He, a particular offspring of the woman, he shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So there's going to be someone of the offspring of the woman that's going to put an end to all the evil in this world that Satan brought about. So Eve is wondering, maybe Cain is it? Is he the promised one of Genesis 3, verse 15? Look at what happens in chapter 4, verse 2. And again, she bore his brother Abel. Now, it's very fascinating. Verse 1, she bore Cain. Then right away, she bore Abel. I mean, obviously not right away. The author mentions, this stuff takes a little bit of time, I know you know. But the author mentions it right away. She got another baby, another one. Abel, his brother. Why introduce his brother so quickly? I think the author here is setting us up for something that's about to happen between these two brothers. Maybe a warring that's going to take place. In fact, he uses this language, she bore his brother Abel, rather than just saying she bore another son named Abel. So this is about Cain and his brother. Cain, what are you going to do here? You got a brother now. The word Abel, to heighten the tension here a little bit, the word Abel means something like vapor or breath. Maybe that's a description of Abel's life. And maybe Cain's going to have something to do with that. Look at the second part of verse 2. Now Abel was a keeper of the sheep, and Cain a worker of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. So these offerings are coming from the fruit of their labor. This is something that the people of Israel, to whom Genesis was originally written, would have practiced later on, giving out of the abundance of what the Lord has given them as an outward demonstration of their worship of God. Not that God needs anything. It's saying, God, all this is yours anyway. I'm trusting you with what I have. That's what a lot of the offerings were throughout the Old Testament. And of course, the people of Israel, and presumably Cain and Abel, God did not call them to offer skimpy leftovers. He wants them to give the best. You should notice the difference between Cain's offering and Abel's offering. You pick up on that? Sorry. Abel gave, as it says, the firstborn, could be translated first fruits, but probably firstborn, of his flock. That's the most important animal. And not only did he give the firstborn of his flock, but he gave, as he slaughtered it and gave it to the Lord as an offering, he gave the fatty portions of that, which is the best part, apparently. Cain, on the other hand, didn't do all that. I mean, Abel wasn't holding back. He gave his best. Cain, it says, simply brought an offering from the fruit of the ground, which can be translated, brought some of the fruit of the ground. I think the author is intending for us to read this in this way. Cain is skimping. He offered the bare minimum. So we're getting a hint here that the problem isn't merely in the offering itself. The difference is not what is presented itself, but the heart behind it. And that becomes clearer in God's response to each of them. Look at the second part of verse 4. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. Now, I don't want you to miss this. It's easy to skip over. It doesn't say merely the Lord had regard for Abel's offering and had no regard for Cain's offering. What does it say? The Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but no regard for Cain and his offering. So this is not just a matter of accepting and rejecting offerings. It is a matter of accepting and rejecting the people who made these offerings, which tells us something is wrong with Cain. Something's wrong with his heart. He looks religious on the outside. I mean, he brings an offering after all. Check that box off. I did it. I did what I was supposed to do. But he didn't do it from a heart of faith. And that's why he brought the bare minimum. Listen, this is what we do when we don't trust God with our whole lives, with everything we have. We give the bare minimum of ourselves just to check off the box. It takes great faith to give all of yourself to the Lord. It's no wonder the writer of Hebrews in the New Testament comments on this story saying, by faith, Abel offered to God a more acceptable sacrifice than Cain. He doesn't just say Abel offered a more acceptable sacrifice. It's by faith. And then it says, through his faith, Abel was commended as righteous. It wasn't about Abel as a better person and God accepts us on the basis of how good we are. No, it's on the basis of his faith that Abel was commended as righteous. So God accepts Abel because of his faith, and therefore I think we should assume then and conclude that he rejects Cain on the basis of his unbelief, rejects him on the basis of his unbelief. There's a self-centered stinginess in Cain, rooted in unbelief. How do you think a self-centered, stingy heart responds to rejection? Look at verse 5. Second part of verse 5. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. He's mad, and he's depressed. This is a sinful form of depression. I don't think all depression is necessarily inherently sinful. This one is. It's another way of saying Cain is throwing himself a pity party. When we throw ourselves a pity party, it usually comes from a place of self-centeredness. We didn't get what we wanted, and so we get mad and sad, angry and sorrowful, rooted in self-centeredness. I think that's a pity party. It's a dangerous place to be. When we let self-centered pity stew in our hearts, we are ripe for sinning in ways that we wouldn't ordinarily sin. That's why God warns Cain here. This is not just some, oh, Cain, come on, get over. No, this is a big deal because he knows what's stewing in Cain's heart. This self-centered pity party mixed with anger and sadness that's all rooted in, I didn't get what I wanted. It's a dangerous place to be, and God knows it, so he confronts Cain. Verse 6. The Lord said to Cain, why are you angry? And why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. You see how sin is depicted here, crouching at the door. It's a picture of a predator, say a lion, patiently waiting for the right moment to devour its prey. You never watched a video of something like that before? Slowly approaching the prey, and just in a flash, just snatches it, devours it. There's a scene in a movie called The Life of Pi. It's a good movie. It's a little intense. I wouldn't recommend it for everyone. But this movie, The Life of Pi, first part of the movie is about, it traces the life of this person named Pi. When he was younger, he goes up to the cage or enclosure of a lion and gets a little too close, and his dad sees it and freaks out and says, get away from there. And to teach his dad, to teach Pi a lesson, wants to visualize what would have happened if he would have gotten caught by that lion. And so the dad chains a goat right outside the entrance of this lion's cage, which is bars that are like this thin, this much apart. A goat could not fit through that on its own. He just holds the boy there. I'm not saying this is good parenting tactic, but this is what he did. Holds the boy there and makes him watch. And the lion slowly creeping up. And then it cuts to the boy's face, and you just hear in the background, and the boy flinches. And when he opens his eyes, he sees this mangled, limp goat on the other side of the bars, as a lion drags away the goat in its teeth. Vivid imagery. Is that how you see your sin? Crouching at the door, ready to kill you? Take heed. Stop treating your sin like a pet to be coddled. It is a lion that wants to feast on your flesh. You don't go snuggling up next to a wild lion. At least you shouldn't. Just a word of advice. Now, I want to ask, what is the specific sin that is crouching like a lion at Cain's door, that he should not coddle, but he should kill? What is it? Now, you might say, maybe it's murder, because we know that's what he's about to do. Many of you read this story ahead of time. There's something far less extreme feeling than that, but no less dangerous to our souls. Think about it. What was Cain coddling rather than killing in his heart? I think simply put, we can put it different ways. Cain craved approval, acceptance, maybe better put, recognition. But even more, it was a step further than just wanting to be recognized. He hated that his brother was recognized. You know what that's called? Envy. I not only want what you have, but I want to make sure if I don't get it, you're not going to get it either. You can't have it either. And if you do, I'm mad and sad, and I'm playing a violin for myself, throwing myself a pity party. I want you to listen to what one author, her name is Tilly Dillahay, I think that's how you pronounce it. Just remember this book. It's called Seeing Green. The subtitle is Don't Let Envy Color Your Joy. I would commend it to you. It was so good. Seeing Green. Don't let envy color your joy. She says this: it is a strange thing, envy. Envy is more interested in getting rid of the other person's advantage than acquiring it for yourself. In a complete demonic reverse of logic, the envious person believes that it would be better for no one to have it than for another person to have it, while he himself goes without it. You see? Sounds a lot like Cain, doesn't it? And I think if we're honest, at times, it sounds a lot like us. The greater sin of murder that we'll see in a minute is simply a symptom of the simple desire for recognition and not wanting that for his brother. And so Cain coddles it until it becomes all-consuming, to the point where he is intent on removing any obstacle that he thinks stands in his way of getting what he wants, even if that obstacle is his own brother. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 8. Verse 8. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. Now at this point, we're like, okay, maybe he's trying to work things out. Is that what he's speaking about? And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. He didn't have guns in that day. This was brutal death. Now, did you notice how many times the author mentions the word brother? He already used it once in verse 2, and now he uses it 2 times in verse 8, and then in verses 9 to 11, he's going to use it 4 more times. 7 total times in 11 verses, he uses the word brother to describe Cain's relationship to Abel. Why? Does this not highlight the heinousness of this sin? Cain is not killing a random person, as bad as that is. He's killing his brother. And he even seemed to lure his brother into the field. Did you notice that in verse 8? He spoke to his brother. What's he doing there? He's trying to lure him to a place where he can take him, where no one else is going to be around to hear his cries. This murder was premeditated. In fact, the word killed here, he killed his brother, that's a specific word that means to murder intentionally. And Cain plotted this because he let the craving for recognition simmer and stew. Oh, don't minimize it in your own heart. I would never murder someone, you say. Maybe you wouldn't. Outwardly. Jesus says hatred of another is murder of the heart. The difference between you and me and Cain is not a difference of kind. It's not a difference that he's a murderer and I'm not. It's a difference of degree. He took it as far as he did because it was ruling his heart to such a degree that it was, but that doesn't mean we don't have the same kind of things ruling our hearts. And that doesn't mean we've not committed murder in our own hearts toward others. Listen, the unchecked cravings for approval and recognition and acceptance will lead you to commit sins that you never thought you would commit. Just this week, as I alluded to before, a well-known preacher was fired for an inappropriate relationship with another woman. And this wasn't some Joe Schmo heretic preaching for financial gain. This guy was known for his faithful Bible preaching. None of us is above this. None of us. And that doesn't come out of nowhere. Most of the time, people don't wake up one day and out of the blue say, you know what, I think I'll have an affair today. Most of the time, people don't just wake up and say, you know what, I'm going to commit murder today. It comes from a series of small compromises and coddling of heart cravings that never get put to death. Listen to how J.C. Ryle put it. He said, "We may be very sure that men fall in private long before they fall in public. They are backsliders on their knees long before they backslide openly in the eyes of the world. Like Peter, the apostle, they first disregard the Lord's warning to watch and pray, and then, like Peter, their strength is gone, and in the hour of temptation, they deny their Lord. The world takes notice of their fall and scoffs loudly, but the world knows nothing of the real reason." End quote. It's no wonder Jesus says in Matthew 5 that anger is murder of the heart. It's no wonder that James says in James chapter 4 that our fighting against one another comes from a heart of unfulfilled desires that lead to, as he says in James 4, things like murder. Or maybe to a lesser degree, but not necessarily a different kind, things like yelling and speaking harsh words or giving a cold shoulder. Heed the warning here. As we read in 1 John 3:11, we should not be like Cain, who was of the evil one and murdered his brother. Isn't that interesting what John is doing there? Don't be like Cain, who is of the evil one. Who is John connecting Cain to? The serpent, the devil. And Cain's response to the Lord reveals this connection to the serpent all the more. Look at verse 9. Verse 9. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel, your brother?" Of course, the Lord knows. He's inciting a confession here. And Cain said, "I do not know." A big fat liar. I don't know. You kidding me? And notice what he says. "Am I my brother's keeper?" So of course Cain knows. He just killed him. So Cain is now what? He's a liar and a murderer. What do those descriptions sound like? The devil. The very descriptions Jesus gives of Satan in John 8:44. He was a liar and a murderer from the beginning. And anyone in his line follows along in suit. Cain here, you notice, doesn't only lie, he also deflects. You see that? He deflects just like his parents did, Adam and Eve. Am I my brother's keeper? You see what he's doing? What a ridiculous question it is. His point is, I'm not responsible for my brother's well-being. Now, I don't think that's true, but let's say it is true. Cain is not responsible for his brother's well-being. Certainly, at the very least, Cain knows he's responsible not to kill his brother. It's just a deflection, and God's not having it. Look at verse 10. And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground." Now, that's just a devastating, vivid picture, isn't it? The way the Lord describes this injustice. Interestingly, sadly, the author never records Abel speaking in this story. His voice is silent the whole time. And the only sound, if you will, that we hear from Abel is actually from his blood crying out from the ground to God, which means that the Lord still hears the cries of the voiceless victims even after they die. Abel will be avenged by the Lord. Look at verse 11. God says to Cain, "And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." I think the curse here certainly echoes the curse upon Adam, but there's also some echoes upon the curse that God gave to the serpent as well. Once again, demonstrating that connection there, indicating he's of the line of the devil, and he's not the new and better Adam who is supposed to come to kill the devil. But what is added here in this curse is that Cain will be this constant wanderer. never truly to settle. He's always going to be wandering, and he feels this. Look at verse 13. Verse 13. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and whoever finds me will kill me." Now, I just want to ask, what kind of response is that? I think it's more self-pity, isn't it? One person said, Cain expresses no inkling of remorse, only self-pity and resentment. That's what unrepentant hearts do. They feel bad for themselves that they have to experience the consequences of their sin, and then they get mad at others for pointing out their sin. Now, God's response to Cain's self-pity is a little bit surprising, I think. Cain is concerned that him being a fugitive wanderer just out in the open, maybe others who would later be born will know Cain is a murderer, and so therefore they're going to try to murder him, and Cain feels that vulnerability. So he says, someone's going to just come and kill me. The murderer fears murder. And look at God's response in verse 15. And the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And he goes on, "And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him." Now, we don't know what this mark is exactly, but some sort of identifiable spot that means to others, would communicate to others, you can't kill this guy. He's protected by the Lord. Now, God did not merely promise protection for Cain. He also said he would bring sevenfold vengeance upon anyone who would try to kill Cain. Why would God do this? Cain doesn't deserve this. I don't know exactly why God chose to protect Cain like this when he did not deserve it. But it certainly highlights God's grace, doesn't it? As one person said, the mark on him to protect his life is a mark of God's goodness and mercy. Even the traitor Cain receives God's mercy. I think when we come to terms with this, that left to ourselves, we'd all be like Cain. We're thankful for mercy. Like, if you're honest with your own life and the sins you've committed, you don't want justice. We love to have justice for other people, but we don't want justice for us. What do we want? Mercy. And that's what God showed Cain. And in showing Cain mercy, I think Cain's response further highlights how hard and unrepentant his heart is. The way you respond to mercy and grace will demonstrate where your heart really is. Look at verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. You notice Cain went away. He walked away from the Lord, even after the Lord showed him grace. And where did he go? Ironically, it says he settled in the land of Nod. The word Nod means wanderer or fugitive. And he settled in a land called wandering. What's going on here? I don't know exactly. I think my interpretation that the context helps us see that this is just another defiance of the Lord. God said, Cain, you're going to be a wanderer. And Cain's like, no, I'm going to settle in a place called wandering. And that'll be good enough. He refused to bear the curse that he deserved. And that wraps up scene 1, and we come into scene 2, where we find that sin infiltrates society. Not only does it affect the family, but it affects the society at large. Look at verse 17. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he, that's Cain, called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So we see multiplying taking place here, don't we? But it's not, I don't think it's a picture of multiplying that was supposed to be before sin happened, when the image of God would spread across the whole world. I think we get a glimpse or just a hint that this is not good multiplying here because the city is named after Cain's son. Cain named it Enoch. I wonder if that is just an arrogant way of Cain trying to make a name for himself. There's echoes here of what's going to happen later on in Genesis 11 with the Tower of Babel. And after all, we know Cain wanted a name for himself. He wanted recognition. And what this now means is that sin is spreading beyond just a family unit, now into a city, a societal unit that he established. It continues in verse 18. To Enoch was born Irid, and Irid fathered Mehujael, and Mehujael fathered Methushael, and Methushael fathered Lamech. If you want any ideas for really good baby names, there you go. You will be made fun of, probably. But you see what's going on here. There's more multiplying. On the face of it, it feels like a good thing, but I think the author is cluing us into the fact that this is not good because whose offspring is multiplying? Cain's, the offspring of the serpent. And that becomes even clearer in verse 19. Notice what happens in verse 19. And Lamech took 2 wives. The name of the one was Adah, and the name of the other was Zillah. That's a surprising change. That should be a shocker to us. Up until this point, it's only been said things like Adam knew Eve, his wife. Cain knew his wife. And now it says Lamech took 2 wives. We're meant to feel the change. Like, what? Why's he got 2 wives? This was not God's original design. Genesis 2:24. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the 2 shall become one flesh. You shouldn't have a group becoming one flesh. Polygamy is sinful. Group marriage is sinful and weird. Right? Let's just be honest. Why is it so weird? Because it's not in our bones. We know one man, one woman. That's how God designed it. One person said, Lamech here represents a progressive hardening in sin. And this progression continues into various aspects of society. Look at verse 20. Adah bore Jabal. He was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. His brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of those who play the lyre and the pipe. Zillah also bore Tubal-Cain. He was the forger of all instruments of bronze and iron. The sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Now, maybe this is just talking about the developments of arts and sciences and agriculture. You can see that. You have agriculture. This guy is those who dwell in tents, verse 20, and have livestock. Then you have Jubal, who's the father of those who are playing instruments. There's the arts, verse 22. Then you have instruments of bronze and iron. There's some science happening. Maybe this is just demonstrating that the cultural mandate that God originally gave to Adam and Eve and to their offspring, where they're to be fruitful and multiply and have dominion over the earth, maybe that's just all this is indicating here. And I think it is, but the context, again, also suggests that we're witnessing here the presence of sin penetrating these various aspects of society, agriculture, arts, and sciences. It's infiltrating the culture. Look at verse 23. And the reason why I say the context suggests this, because we just saw Lamech took 2 wives against God's design. And now we're going to see what Lamech does later on. So the context is just bad. And so I think that is also the case in verses 20 to 22. So notice what happens in verse 23. Lamech said to his wives, Adah and Zillah, hear my voice, you wives of Lamech. Listen to what I say. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. If Cain's revenge is 7-fold, then Lamech's is 77-fold. What? I must admit, as I was reading over this passage, and as I've read it over in the past, my focus was all on Cain and Abel. I did not notice there was another murder in this passage. Lamech killed someone. We don't know who this is. Seems like a younger man That word young man is often used to describe a youth. And it surely looks like that his killing of this young man was way out of proportion. The young man wounded him, struck him, and Lamech took him out completely. So it's out of proportion. And it seems as well, in this poetic fashion, Lamech is flaunting this before his two wives. I don't think this is a sincere confession of sin. He says in verse 24, Cain's revenge is sevenfold. You remember what that means? This is referring to the grace, if you will, that God showed Cain. If anyone would come and try to kill him, God would bring vengeance upon that person sevenfold. It's showing this protection of Cain above and beyond. Apparently, Lamech knew that, but notice here, he demands even more grace. He's demanding it 77-fold. If Cain got sevenfold protection, I'm getting 77-fold protection. I think that's what he's saying. So much defiance, so much self-sufficient pride here. And this text is just begging us. It's begging for a seed of the woman who's not like Cain, who kills his own brother out of envy. We need one who is killed in the place of his brothers and sisters out of love. It's begging for one who's not like Lamech, who demands 77-fold forgiveness from God. What we need is one who offers 77-fold forgiveness from God. This text begs for a seed of the woman who will make all things right. And we get a hint of that in scene 3, which can be titled, The Beginnings of Belief. Look at verse 25. Verse 25. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bore a son and called his name Seth. For she said, God has appointed for me another offspring instead of Abel, for Cain killed him. So the author takes us back. This may be a flashback to Adam and Eve multiplying again. Their first go at it ended in murder of one of their sons from the other. And then the next multiplying, their great-great-great-grandchild Lamech committed more murder. But now here it seems what it's being said is they have a chance at a new beginning. In fact, the name Seth means appointed. And I think this idea of appointed carries the notion of a new beginning. Like there's something new happening here. Seth is not merely a replacement for the loss of Abel. He's the start of a new line of those who will trust the Lord. And that's where this passage ends. Verse 26. To Seth also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. At that time, people began to call upon the name of the Lord. The name Enosh means weakness, which is very different than the line of Cain, self-sufficient people who think they don't need God or think they have a right to his unending grace. But this new line of people know they're weak. And that's why they call on God. The line of Seth here represents this truth, that amid multiplying murderers, sin infiltrating family and society, in light of all that, God will still preserve a remnant who trust him. We're given a glimmer of hope that a seed of the woman will one day come and turn this Genesis 3 world into a new and better Genesis 2 world where there is no sin. The seed of the woman came. This seed of the woman came. And unlike Cain, who approves evil and recognition, Jesus Christ came humbly, having no form or majesty that we should revere him. Unlike Cain, who was so envious that he was willing to kill his own brother, Jesus Christ is so others-focused that he laid down his life for his brothers. Unlike Lamech, who so arrogantly demands unending forgiveness for himself. Jesus Christ needs no forgiveness from God because he's without sin, and therefore he becomes the one, he is the one who offers unending forgiveness, 77-fold forgiveness to sinners like you and me. You feel in this Genesis 3 world why we need Jesus so badly? If you're not a Christian, can I just press into you, please? You need Jesus so badly. What does that mean? You need someone else to step in your place, to take the punishment that you deserve for every sin you committed. I've never murdered anyone. Well, Jesus told us hatred in the heart is murder of the heart. We need someone to step in our place because we deserve full punishment from God. We deserve justice. That's what we deserve. But God gives us grace. Why? Because someone else took justice upon themselves. And that was Jesus, the seed of the woman, the final one who would come and receive a wound from the enemy, if you will, but then crush the head of the serpent. You need Jesus. If you're not a Christian, you need him. You need to trust him today. When Jesus died on the cross, he died for every single sin. He paid the penalty for every single sin that you would ever commit if you would receive it today, if you would trust him today. And we know he didn't stay dead. He rose victoriously over the grave, demonstrating conquering of sin and death. Trust Christ today. Receive that free gift and receive 77-fold forgiveness from God. Listen, I know some of you are tired of the effects of sin, no matter how hard and exhausting the battle is, though, Christian. No matter how much devastation you see and feel from sin around you, remember, never forget this. God always preserves a remnant of his people who trust him. That's what this passage teaches us. This world will go to hell in a handbasket, but God will protect his people by his grace. Lay hold of that in this Genesis 3 world as we await that final day when God makes all things new through Christ. Amen. Let's pray together. Father in heaven, I pray for the weary Christian today who is so beat down by the effects of sin, their own and then others that they see around them. Oh God, strengthen weak knees. Raise up weary hearts. Encourage the faint-hearted. And give our hearts the focus that they need. Let us put them on Jesus, Jesus alone. Thank you that in him and in him alone we are strengthened. Thank you for what Jesus did for us. And it's in his name that we pray. Amen.